the storm around the Miss South Africa contestant Chidimma Adetshina. She's of Nigerian heritage. Her father is Nigerian. Her mother is reportedly South African of Mozambican descent. I believe has again shown the spotlight on the dangerous xenophobia that exists in this country. And it trickles down from the very top. We've seen the sports minister, Gaten McKenzie, calling for an investigation into her citizenship. It's now backed by the Home Affairs Minister, Leon Schreiber, who confirmed that the department is looking into the contestant's status. He says this was at the request of the Miss South Africa company and by the consent of Chidimma. But according to the Miss South Africa company, she meets all the requirements to be a contestant of Miss South Africa, which include being a South African. I'm joined now by Stefanie De Saude Darbandi. She's an immigration law specialist. Good morning, Stefanie. Really appreciate your time. Whether this is a consideration or a topic around Miss South Africa, or whether this is a conversation around a child, a young person who is the children of immigrants, of migrants to this country and who've lived here and only know a South African identity, it does raise the spectre of ongoing xenophobia in this country, Stefanie.
Morning, Lester. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I agree with you. I think the underlying issues here are xenophobia and Afrophobia attitudes, and it's quite sad, actually.
Just break down the citizenship requirements. In what aspects, what is the criteria of attaining a South African citizenship that may be the case when it comes to Chidimma?
Okay, so one of the big latest amendments to the Citizenship Act was in January 2013. So because she was born before that, the law applicable at the time applies to her. And the law applicable at the time of her birth, provides that if at the time of your birth in South Africa, so it makes a difference between being abroad and being born in South Africa, but it provides that if at the time of your birth in South Africa, at least one of your parents is either a South African permanent resident or a South African citizen, then you were born a citizen. So I want to emphasize that means that, let's say both of her parents were Nigerian with South African permanent residence, she would still be born a South African citizen. It makes no difference to whether they were permanent residents or citizens. What we know is that her mother is a dual national of both South Africa and Mozambique. Apparently, she was naturalized a South African. One of the steps prior to naturalizing is being a permanent resident. So whether her mother was a permanent resident or citizen at the birth, it makes no difference to her status. She was born a South African citizen.
So this isn't even a case that requires the law to look into. This is a case of South African sentiment, and it's that pervading xenophobic sentiment that is driving this conversation, Stefanie.
That's right. And it is the law that dictates her status. It's not Home Affairs. Home Affairs dictates the law dictates to Home Affairs whether or not to register her as a foreigner or a citizen. So in a case like this, where you were born to a South African, Home Affairs doesn't have any discretion. The law says you are a South African. And questioning her status is not only discrimination and violates of principles of equality and human dignity, but it also it disregards legal principles. It's saying that, we don't care what the law says. This is what we say, and we think that we are right.
You write in the Business Day that for many who hold dual or multiple citizenships, that's for a practical reason. It offers benefits. But yes, that there is a conversation in South Africa that dismisses one's identity. I used the example earlier in the show that I know of young people, young South Africans in their 20s who've come here or whose parents have come here as migrants. They've been born here. South Africa is the only identity, only culture. They've only been through a South African education system. but they're being made to feel that they are something that is other. And I think that is very, very disappointing, especially if you fall into a legal grey area, if you were born after when laws were changed on when you were born and whether you were born in South Africa. And I think that would be very, very
Yes.
distressing for a young person who may be the child of migrants, but who only knows South Africa as their identity, as their culture.
That's right. And when we start using words such as, we won't let them become or hold this crown or participate, there's division that's already being created. It's them and us. And that is something that we need to be careful of, especially in South Africa. And, using words like we are investigating, I mentioned this yesterday, it implies wrongdoing. And we're judging her and calling her guilty before we've even, unpacked the situation. There's one thing to have freedom of speech, and there's one thing to act as a leadership for, on what people are bringing to your attention. But there's another thing to be discriminatory and xenophobic in the public eye and to encourage this sort of discrimination.
But this is also a 23-year-old. Just 5 years ago, she was still a minor citizen in South Africa. Whatever decision, rightfully or wrongly, lawfully or unlawfully, was not made by her. So even whatever way
That's right.
these chips fall, this is still a 23-year-old young person. Whatever happens, her future was dictated to by others, but she is the one being blamed here.
That's absolutely right. And this happens very often. You'll find that minors enter South Africa with their foreign parents and something happens along the way. And I will say, as someone that's doing this for, over 20 years, these people get stuck into a system where they're trying to regularize their status, trying to apply for the proper status. They get arrested by the police. They get, told, give me some money, I'll, organize a status or whatever the case may be. And they want to protect themselves and their children. And sometimes they do that. I'm not saying this is the case in Chidimma. I'm just speaking to what you mentioned. And years later, Home Affairs suddenly discovers, hold on, your parents' status is in question. And then the child pays the price.
Stefanie De Saude Darbandi, really appreciate your time.